everyone that's joined us. Come on in, join Aziz and I. Welcome to Crossing Boundaries, Global Connections and Conversations, the live stream that helps us discover that far more unites us than divides us. I'm Kim Passi-Yosef, the Operations Director at Mejdi Tours, and this is my co-host, Global Peace Advocate and co-founder of Mejdi, Aziz Abu Sera.
Thank you, Kim, and hello, everyone. And this has been, wow, an amazing kind of crazy week, good stuff, bad stuff happening. But one of the coolest thing that happened this week, Kim, is that we have run our first in-person, like real, we've done a couple one-day tour here and there, but like we've run a 10-day trip in Jerusalem for the first time. Gosh, since March. For a tour company, it's crazy to say that. Since March a year ago, 16 months. So you were with the group. How was it?
I mean, I sent you a picture, and for me, this was a lot. The last day that Aziz was in Israel before COVID, we were sitting at the same hotel, which was the first hotel for this group. So for me, that was, like closing that circle.
Did you go eat falafel from the same place?
I took a picture of the falafel place, and then I went to the hotel and I sat up on the roof and I said, this is crazy. And I'm so glad that they stayed at this first hotel because this is just giving me hope, right? You were asking me on that balcony, you said, so this whole COVID thing, what do you think? And I said, it's gonna pass by. We won't even notice it. Maybe a month or two. So boy, was I wrong. But this group, I gotta tell you, 6 amazing travelers, spontaneous, very brave, joined us, came, I think they bought the ticket and a week later they were here. They had to do COVID tests in the US, COVID tests when they landed, even a blood test to check their immunity. And it's been quite the ride. And one of the things, I met them today, they're leaving tomorrow morning, and I asked them, how was the trip? And one of them said, it's so great to see that Mejdi is doing what you're talking about and not just talking about it. And, we've been talking quite a lot this past year, virtually mainly. And it's so great to see the people in person, to see them experiencing the dual narrative, experiencing just learning so much on the tour.
That's awesome. All right. And we had to improvise because we couldn't this trip yet do much in the West Bank because of the coronavirus. We know that we will be able, our next groups, to go there. But actually it's amazing because there's a large Palestinian community within Israel that we often focus on the West Bank and don't focus on them as much. And this trip, we were able to focus on things that we didn't before. Joint cities like Lod and like Akko, meet with Palestinian citizens of Israel and with Israeli citizens there, and talk about the relationships and the recent violence and how do you create a shared society, what are the problems. And I think that's fascinating. But also we're able to meet other minorities like the Cherkessian community in Israel that I honestly didn't know about until recently. And, doing those kind of things that were, mixing those new things that we always wanted to do, but I think never had the time to put it in an itinerary. So that's exciting as well.
It is 100%. And I have to say that even as a local, the conversations were interesting to me. Joining the group in Lod after the recent events was fascinating. We heard both sides one after the other, and they were telling the same stories. And it's not even something you can plan when you're bringing a group to meet a speaker. You can't tell them, oh, you can tell this story and then you'll tell this story from the other side. So it's really interesting, and that's a huge part of what we're talking about today too.
Right.
I mean, there's a huge connection.
So let's move into that. And we welcoming Todd again. This is the second time we have Todd Allen, Dr. Todd Allen, join us. And he's become a good friend of Mejdi. We are working on a lot of projects and tours together. And it's just exciting. And Todd, you have been involved in putting together these learning experiences for many years of the civil rights. And I was saying to you earlier today that to me, what I'm learning more is civil rights is something that's an international struggle. It seems like every country around the world is going through it. And I know for me, today has been an awful day just because Palestinian civil rights activist or political activist was assassinated by the police, Palestinian police, which is very uh, just traumatic to hear. It's somebody I followed for years. I watch his videos, and I don't agree with even a lot of what he says, but it's somebody who speaks a lot about corruption, and that I admire. And he was murdered today, and it's making a lot of Palestinians go into what's happening, what's going on with silencing voices in our own country. And there's a lot of what I've learned from the civil rights movement actually in the US that can be applied worldwide. And a lot of things that happened worldwide that I know MLK have actually applied in the civil rights movement, for example, in the US. So I just wanted maybe to start by asking you about that connection of civil rights in the US to what's happening globally in the world.
Right. No, well, first of all, Aziz and Kim, I thank you again for the opportunity to be back with you. In the 20 years that I've been leading civil rights tours and then even longer studying the history of the civil rights movement in the United States, I always go back to, one of the songs of the movement, and that is that freedom is a constant struggle. And so whether we're talking about in Palestine, whether we're talking about in Selma, Alabama, or you name the place on the globe. You're right. This is a struggle of both civil rights as well as human rights, and so this idea, even thinking about the influences on King for a moment, they were many and varied, and they were both domestic as well as global. And so, whether again we're talking about exploring the past or what's going on right here in the very right now present. There are lessons that this movement can teach us and lessons that still need to be applied today.
I'm sorry.
What's
Sorry, I
that?
was muted too.
Yeah, both of us are talking. Kim, why didn't you go?
I said really interesting things. Um, I'm kidding. I wanted to ask you. I know that in Israel there were very recent the events, violent events, and I feel like people are still talking about them. But I'm wondering for how long it will continue. And I know that last time you joined us on the show, there was a lot going on in the U.S. and how has that conversation evolved since last year? I mean, I know there were a lot of demonstrations. There was a lot of conversation on the news and, everything that was going on. Do you still feel it today? Are people still talking about it? Has anything changed?
Uh, I think yes and no to all of that. I mean, I think as the world is opening back up again a little more, people have more distractions now. I think that's one of the things we didn't have a year ago. This time, we weren't as distracted, and so that's why a lot of these events, they weren't new if you had eyes to see and ears to hear, but the fact that people had less distractions, for some it was an awakening moment, right? There have been some progress. We think about the murder of George Floyd, for example. As much as I sat on pins and needles, thinking that the initial officer involved, would not get indicted, He did. Of course, we're still awaiting sentencing, and we're waiting to see what happens with the remaining officers. Still, no one has gone to trial yet for the killing of Ahmaud, and there's still been little to no justice for Breonna. Um, you get a mixed bag. You get a few weeks ago, a week ago, the president of the United States, with the support of Congress, approves Juneteenth as a national holiday, and I don't want to make light of that. But at the same time, state legislatures all over this country have been actively busy working to make the right to vote uh, extremely difficult and inaccessible. And so there have been some performative things done in this regards, but there's still a lot of transformative work that needs to be done. I think there's a lot of distraction and deflection going on right now in this moment too. I hate to say it because I don't really want to talk about it here, but these conversations that people are having around critical race theory
I was just going to
are
ask
the
you
are
about
the
it.
are the biggest distraction and deflection. Honestly, it's like we'll keep you busy over here focusing on something that's a non-issue, and then we'll steal the votes, the ability to vote behind you while you're over here debating this nonsense.
Right. I was just going to ask you about the critical race theory and how it has become the biggest issue. And I've talked to some people about it, and I found in many cases people have taken positions for or against based on their political group,
Yes. Yeah.
and they have no idea what is critical race
Well,
theory.
that's it. The short answer that I give to it is if you understand what race is and how race was constructed, and you realize that that was built up on a lie and that race is a lie, it's got some very real economic, political, historical, and even theological supports behind it, but it's still a lie. And for me, as a person of faith, then I should be critical of lies. And so I tell people, well, then if you want to call me a critical race theorist, then yes, that's what I am, because I'm critical of the lie of race, which has caused all this dysfunction, disharmony, and disunion in this country.
We didn't talk much about that last time, but when I went, I was recently in Alabama, and I went through
Okay.
the Legacy Museum, which is,
Yes.
wow, what an amazing job they have done in putting that museum together. It's like so moving to walk through
Yes.
it. But one of the things, I walked in, and there's a lot of times when people of faith have supported slavery, people of faith have advanced, segregation, have justified treating other human beings as less than a human being. In some cases, it was official, three-fourths of a human being. And as I went through churches, actually, I was told by my neighbor here that in South Carolina, there are still churches that advocate that black people shouldn't come to a white church because God doesn't want whites and blacks to mix, which to me was crazy to hear that it's happening
Yeah.
today. And as a person of faith, how do you deal with that? How does that make you feel, and how do you process this kind of information from a faith point of view?
Sure. Well, you mentioned the Peace and Justice Memorial at EJI, oftentimes referred to as the lynching memorial. And I think one of the things that people miss is, there were lynchings that occurred on Sunday afternoons that churches would let out early so that people could go literally in their Sunday best, taking a picnic basket and go to the lynching on the town square. So how do I reconcile, or how do I approach it as a person of faith? I got to know the late Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was part of the SCLC and part of the Freedom Rides and the Nashville movement. And I asked Rev one time, I said, Rev, do you ever feel like you missed your calling to be a pastor? And he says, well, he says, some people are called to the ministry to pastor. Some people are called to the ministry to do missions. He said, I was called to the ministry for the purpose of the movement. He says, because what you have to remember is they went to church too. They were deacons and elders too. They were pastors too. And for him, he said that the movement was a battle to see whose God was God. Was God the God of oppression? Was God the God of injustice? Was God the God of segregation? I mean, literally, you can go back in the archives and look at signs that protesters, I mean, these white protesters holding up signs saying God is the author of segregation, right? Or was God the God of justice? Was God the God of unity? Is God the God of integration and truth? And he said, and I believe that God is the God of truth and justice. And so that's the side I stand on. And so, it doesn't shock me then, and it doesn't shock me now, the ways in which people misinterpret and misapply their faith in order to justify wrong. That's what people do. But I also know that that's not that there is a better way, that there is a more excellent way.
I know Kim has a question, but I want to do a follow up on that. Sorry, Kim. Um, I was invited a few years back to a large church in Atlanta to speak, and they were doing this event on dealing with prejudice within the church, issues like the relationship between members of the church. It was a mixed church, but it had, some parts of the church were in the richer and some in the poorer, and some were in the more white neighborhood and some in the more black neighborhood. And I remember I stayed with a couple there. And the wife, I remember the morning I was doing my talk, was telling me that she doesn't understand why in the church we needed to talk about this conversation. She's like, we all Christians, we all love each other. We shouldn't just talk about these. This is all the past. Let's move forward. And I find that attitude quite common in churches who say, well, this is a place for worship now. Yeah, maybe in the past there were some issues, but we shouldn't in churches anymore tackle these issues because they are divisive. What do you think about that? Should churches be talking about these things? Should people of faith, Muslims, Jews, in synagogues and in mosques also be talking about this? Or is this really an issue that shouldn't be brought in any place of faith because it's divisive?
I respond that in any of our spaces of faith, do we talk about sin? Do we talk about the fallenness and brokenness in the human condition? Well, if you're not talking about that in your place of worship, then you're not in a place of worship. You're in a gathering that's appearing to present itself as a place of worship, but it's I think Dr. King referred to it as just a social club with a thin veneer of religiosity, is what he referred to those kind of spaces, right? Racism is a sin. Racism is a sickness. And the only way that you're going to cure a sickness is by exposing and treating that sickness, right? Not by ignoring it, not by saying it's in the past, it will go away as though it were in remission. I think the headlines of the day teach us and tell us and let us know that it's not in remission, even in our places and spaces of worship. Now, again, people might not like talking about it, and people might be uncomfortable in talking about it. But it's a very real reality. If we're not talking about it, particularly if we're not talking and modeling other ways of engaging with those who are like us and those who are unlike us, our children are observing what we do and do not do.
How do we make the conversation more comfortable? How do we make people not think that, they are to blame? I think that a church or a place of worship is probably worried to take responsibility or something of the sort. How do we show people that it's okay to talk about it? Doesn't mean anything about you,
You
for
know,
example?
I come from a tradition that says that the best sermons have a mixture of ouch and amen in it, that the word should comfort the disturbed and it should disturb the comfortable, right? And so, yeah, no one is trying to make anyone feel guilty or shamed or any of that. But at the same time, truth has to go forward, right? I think truth combined with love. I've heard it said that truth without love kills, and love without truth lies. And so we've got to have that combination. Um, And again, it doesn't mean that every conversation. I mean, I have conversations about these subjects all the time. Not every conversation is a heavy conversation. Not every conversation, as I call, one of those a Kleenex moment kind of thing. There can be some great joy found, in getting together across our division. Again, you said at the top of the hour, far more unites us than what divides us. And so, part of having these conversations are not only talking about the divisions amongst us, but talking about those moments and aspects and elements of unity and unification as well.
So let's Kim go.
I wanted to move into talking about how we're ourselves trying to create some sort of change, which is through tourism. And I saw that you too have started traveling again and started receiving groups. I'm following you on Facebook. And I wonder, who are the people, who are the first people that are thinking, oh, we can travel again. I want to do something with a
Uh,
very meaningful experience and
uh,
not just go to the beach.
yeah, well, I can't remember if you said it was you or Aziz who thought, that the pandemic thing would be just a few months and then we'd be back to traveling. That was my mentality. I was like, when I had to cancel my trip a year ago, June, I thought, well, man, well, maybe I can go in September. And little did I know. It was so exciting to get back. I mean, I think obviously those who've gotten, vaccinated, fully vaccinated, are most excited, most eager to get out. But again, with all that's going on, in the nation and in the world around race and racial unrest, and so much that people don't know about our past, right, about our shared past, has led to a strong desire among people to get to these places where the movement happened. As people who specialize in tourism, the power of place, right? There's nothing, the best book, the best documentary film doesn't quite capture what it's like to be in that space with the people who helped to make that history happen. And so, I was out last month was the first trip that I hosted with a group from church from California. And it's actually the first visit for many of the veterans, movement veterans now who are vaccinated. And it was interesting because, you're doing that sort of, I almost said touch and go, but you're not really touching anybody. But trying to get back to a little bit more of what things were like in the past. But honestly, with this one I just did last week, outside of, a few restaurants just being short staffed, and a few more little protocols that you go through in entering museums, you really wouldn't notice a difference from past travel.
It's amazing how quickly we're going to forget about this whole period. Um,
Well, there's some things that I would like to forget, um, but then there are other things that I do. I've been saying that if we come out of this situation the same, then we've missed a lesson. If we come out, I said at the beginning of this what I thought was the end, but it was just still the beginning. I can't wait till things go back to normal. And then I had to realize, normal wasn't necessarily working all that well and wasn't working that well for everybody. And I think we're now seeing, as we're trying to, make a little more progress towards normalcy, that
New
there's some things
normal.
that were broken, and that we've got to give attention to that. So I hope we don't forget too much.
Like you said, I think normal isn't working still for everyone. The fact
Yeah.
that, looking at who's getting vaccinated, who's not around the world, show us that unfortunately the normal isn't.
Hmm.
The fact that we can't make more vaccines to meet the needs of the world, despite all the wealth, we can start more factories. We can't really make more vaccines because
Hmm.
we have to protect certain companies is absurd to me, because
Yeah.
it eventually gonna bite us back as there are more variants of this COVID, and as it evolves, and then the vaccine we have might not be as efficient. So the
Right.
whole world economy depends on it. The whole world depends on it, and yet we still making things the old way, and that's what we haven't learned, I
Yeah.
think, from before.
Dr. King used to say that we're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, bound together in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And
Hmm.
so if the pandemic did not teach us that lesson.
Yeah. So tell us what was different between your last trip before the pandemic and your first trip
Wow.
as things are changing.
Well, we had to, and I'm in Pennsylvania, and so there were certain restrictions on the number of people who could be on the bus. So I had to reduce my numbers literally about in half. Normally, I travel with about 40 to 45 people, and we travel with 25 so that we could have
And
some
this is an
social.
annual trip you
This
run,
is an
right?
annual trip, yeah. So
Right.
so that was different. Then, of course, right before it was time to depart, restrictions were lifted. I could have added more people, but the complexities of that. So I left that part alone. Really, that was the most different. It was funny though. Like I said, with the many of the veterans that we meet with. For example, we were in Selma last month, and Joanne Bland, who takes us on a walking riding tour. I'm in the car with her as we're kind of doing some of the tour, and she looks at me, she goes, "Oh," she goes, "It's been over a year since I've done one of these. I'm a little rusty." So just getting back into the swing. But I tell you what, it doesn't take you long though. And the other thing it did for me, I've been doing these for 20 years. It really made me appreciate it all the more, because after a while you can take these trips and they almost become sort of routine for you. I mean, they're still important, they're always important, but
Right.
they can become sort of more routine. I really treasured every single moment, more so this time than probably I have since I began these, because you never know, this could be the last one, right? And there were people that we lost between our last trip and this one, none due to COVID, but there were people that aren't there anymore, and we could feel that difference
Hmm.
when we were in those destinations. But so grateful about it. In fact, I said when I climbed aboard the bus, I said I never thought I'd be so happy to sit on a motor coach and ride for hours in my life, but I really was.
Did you feel that the travelers are coming with a different mindset after COVID? I mean, I know it's a long time, gave a lot of
Yeah,
people time to think and to read and to learn.
yeah. I mean, they're coming with a lot more questions,
Mm.
which is good. And my approach is, I tell them as a professor, my job is not to tell you what to think. My job is to put you in the spaces and give you some things to think about. And then they all kind of say, "Hey." Then I say, well, but truthfully, as a professor, I kind of chose where we're going, so I am kind of telling you what to think. But no, I really want people, when they travel, to have. I'm there as a resource. I'm there as a guide, but I want you to kind of have your own experience. I want you to have your own thoughts. I want you to walk away, hopefully with some answers, but also with some more questions than perhaps you had. So this year, the most popular questions were, a lot of people now have discovered Tulsa, 100 years later, and so they wanted to know more about Tulsa, and about, has this happened anywhere else in the nation and in our nation's history. I think people are still continuing to figure out where the Black Lives Matter sorts of fits into this conversation. And then I think, thirdly, people are trying to figure out, how do I respond back to those people who are critical of folk going on civil rights tours, saying that's divisive, that's in the past, leave it there. Um, but no, all in all, folk are just really excited, I think, to get back on the road, and to be in these places and spaces.
As are we. Aziz, do you want to take a, this is a good chance to talk about the tours that we're planning now,
Yeah,
for the
so
fall.
we are working together, Todd, we have a trip already filled in October that we are running. And then we have a trip that's coming up in September that still has some spaces. So everyone who's listening, can you maybe walk us through what we will do on these trips? Because when I tell it to people, they're like, "Oh, it's gonna be heavy and depressing, and I'm gonna just learn about how awful white people were." And I don't want to like I've got that from quite a few people.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
wonder
yeah, yeah.
what you how would you explain this trip? Because I tried to say no, because one, the experience isn't only see how we suffer, there's more than that.
Right,
And there's a lot of moments of how we work together
right.
that I got to see when I went on just my recent excursion toward
Uh,
Alabama and New Orleans. So what would we do on this trip?
Sure. Sure. Well, I don't have the specific itineraries in front of
Right.
me at the moment, so I apologize. But in general, I hear that often of, oh, why would I want to go on an experience like that? It is going to be emotionally heavy. In fact, somebody was talking to me recently, and they said they were particularly interested in, well, how young is too young to go on a trip like that or to learn this history? This person just happened to be Jewish, and so I said to them, I said, well, how young is it for my son, who's African American, to be confronted with racism when kids say they won't play with him when he goes to preschool? And I said, and then they kind of looked, and I said, well, is it ever too young for you to start sharing about your Jewish identity, history, and heritage with your children? And of course not. It's not too young. But of course, I mean, I think you want to do things that are done in an age appropriate way. Are there some heavy moments? Yeah, there's some heavy moments. There are heavy moments in all of our in human experience. But are there some moments of joy and hope? Yes, there are those moments as well. And I think that too is a reflection of the human condition. I think, yeah, that's another thing that I hear. I usually don't hear it before the trip, but I will hear it, a couple days in. A young white person will come up alongside me, or sometimes a not so young white person, and they will say that I was told by, and you sort of fill in the blank, my mother, uncle, cousin, you don't want to go on that trip because they're just going to tell you how bad white people are. And I said, but then I came on this trip and I heard about Viola Liuzzo, a mom from Detroit, white woman who didn't know anybody in Selma. But when she saw the injustice of Bloody Sunday, she went to Selma, stayed in Selma for 3 weeks, made the march from Selma to Montgomery. And when she was returning people back to Selma, a group of Klansmen pulled up alongside her car, killing her. This is a white woman, didn't know anyone in Selma, but she knew injustice and gave her life for the movement. Or they say, I didn't know about a Reverend Robert Gretz, who was a white pastor of an all Black Lutheran congregation in Montgomery. And he and his family got involved in the Montgomery Improvement Association, the group that helped to run the over a year long bus protest. And for that, their home was bombed. Or I didn't know about Joan Mulholland or Jim Swerg or James Peck. The list goes on. All these persons who got involved in the freedom rides. And I think another thing that people don't know, especially when they ask me that question about how young is too young, that the number of people that we meet with, these veterans, were teenagers, and some even not quite into their teens when they got involved in the movement. So ultimately, I tell people, this trip and trips like this give you the ability to move inside what is so universal about being human, and that is storytelling. And
Yeah.
so a civil rights movement tour it gives the power of the story. It's the story of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. It's a story of sacrifice where some made the ultimate sacrifice in terms of losing their lives or their lives were taken. But it is also a story of faith, hope, and resilience. And so, if in this day and age, people want to understand how do we move more towards what unites us than what divides us, we need to know those stories because each and every one of us are ordinary people, but we've got within us the ability to do extraordinary things. Each and every one of us has within us the ability, and God willing, it doesn't have to happen, but to make sacrifices, and maybe even some might have to make an ultimate sacrifice. And each and every one of us, people often ask me what gives me hope, particularly in the very dark moments. And I tell people it's my faith because I know how the story ends.
Yeah, I I think it's so important to not be ignorant about our history, to not be ignorant about what happened, to be willing to face even the stories that we don't want to hear and maybe don't want to connect with, but also to connect to the stories of what's happening today. You can't understand the present without understanding the past. And part of what we together are trying to do and setting these trips and setting other trips. I think we're running a trip in Michigan in a few months on understanding the divide between Democrats and Republicans, and or maybe progressives and conservatives. If we can't connect to those hard questions and those difficult historical truths, then we easily can be manipulated by politicians, by media, and I can't anymore listen to the news. Doesn't matter really even which channel, TV news, more than 15 minutes, because I can tell that I'm being socialized to believe in whatever a narrative is being presented to me. And it's so easy to be manipulated by that if you don't take time to study it. And what a better way to do it than actually go and meet the people and hear and have conversations instead of, we now learn more on Twitter, unfortunately,
Right,
than we
right.
do in person.
Well,
So,
no, I think you're 100% right. I want to back up to you said so many important things in that statement, but one of which that jumped out to me is it's our history. It's not Black history. It's not African American history. It's our history. It's our history as a nation, but it's our history as human beings. It's history that shaped not only this nation but has influenced other nations around the world. Right. But unfortunately, the history that, or sometimes what passes as history, that people are taught is that feel good. We want all the feel good moments of our stories. As Brian Stevenson says, we do celebration well, we do victory well, we do triumph well. We don't do sorrow, we don't do lament, we don't do I made a mistake. We don't do that kind of history well. And when it comes to teaching the history of the civil rights movement, there was a report that came out a few years ago, and maybe it overstated it, but not by much. But it said, most people's knowledge of the civil rights movement in the United States can be boiled down to two names and four words, and they don't even know that all that well. And those two names, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, those four words, I have a dream, right? And even that is not taught well. But as we know, and as people will discover when they go on this journey, that we're going to take this fall, that there's so much more to be learned, even about those two figures, but so much even more to be learned about the other people and places that we're going to go. There's been a lot of conversation as of late. I'm still hanging in there watching the news, Z's. But there's a lot of conversation as of late talking about the need for improved civics education, right? And I agree with that. I think one of the ways you improve it, though, again, is not by continuing to perpetuate lies, but tell the truth and tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
yeah, you're reminding me. There's, I think, a scripture in John chapter 8 when Jesus talks about knowing the truth by putting it into practice, and the
There you
truth will
go.
set you free. Right.
Amen.
So I just connected in me. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
Truth will set you free, even when it's not pretty to hear.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
I want to talk to you, Todd, about the connections that you're creating, the personal connections that you're creating through this work. I mean, we were talking earlier about the connection that you made on our previous live stream, and it was 100% by chance. So we'll talk about that, but also on your tours and the people that you're meeting throughout the tour, I'm sure that that's creating a completely different experience for you and for the travelers.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, if anybody has a question, this is a good time to
Yep.
let us know.
Sure. First of all, I'd want to talk about the veterans of the movement. You know, I grew up as a kid in high school learning this history. Never could I have imagined that the people in my history books would now be friends of mine, and they'd be contacts in my phone, and would become family, right? In a lot of real, in so many ways. So that to me is one of the most mind blowing parts of this, is that, you know, I look at the integration of Central High School in Little Rock, right? And I see those 9 students marching up those steps. And to know that I've become friends with some of those then teenagers, right? And I know what it was like for me being inspired by learning their stories through watching films and reading about them. My son has had these people at his dinner table in his home. I mean, that's just mind blowing. The participants that have gone on these tours over the years, obviously, when you do this for 20 years and you do multiple trips, you lose track of who went what year and all of that. But, you know, I can, you know, say that I can go many places in these United States, and a few places outside, and run into somebody who's gone, you know, on one of our tours, and just even watching where they have gone with the information that they've received. And I'll say this too, you know, in the 20 years that I've been doing my main tour, we've had 4 bus drivers in that 20-year time frame, only 4, and they've all become like family. When my son graduated high school 4 years ago, all the bus drivers came to his graduation party. You know, it's wild, right? Just the and just even watching the way, you know, I've seen like some of the speakers that we have, watching their kids and grandkids grow up. It's just been phenomenal. So you talked about the last live stream that I was on, and that you know, when I was invited to have a conversation about race with a former white supremacist Klan leader, you know, and I said I was shocked when I got on because it wasn't the person that I thought I would be meeting with, and so I'm like kind of feeling out who this guy is, and little did I know what a blessing that conversation would become in the person of TM Garrett. From that time a year ago, as I was saying before our call began, there's not a week now that's gone by that we don't stay in some kind of contact. A lot of it on social media, but every so often we'll talk on the phone. And I've actually had him do a webinar on my campus. But I was just with him. We met for the first time in person a month ago when I had a group in Memphis, and he came by, and we hugged, and it was like you could tell we were both waiting for that moment to finally meet. And then we just happened to be in Atlanta a week past Sunday, uh, together. And so I said, well, drop over to the King Center and let's meet. And we spent the afternoon in Atlanta, and you know, I just couldn't be more in awe and appreciative of that brother. Because again, you know, people say, well, what gives you hope? I mean, here is a guy who did not, and this is an understatement when I say did not like people like me, right? Would cause harm to someone like me. And here he is hugging me in a genuine embrace. And I'm very serious when I told him I'm coming to Mississippi. He just put in a pool. I was like, I'm coming to Mississippi, and we're having some of that barbecue, and I'm getting in the pool. And if you'd have told me a year ago, you know, one day I see you swimming in a pool in Mississippi, having barbecue with a former Klansman from Germany, I'd have been like, are you out of your mind? Right. But amazing things can happen. Again, if we're open to those opportunities. And so I thank you for that opportunity. If no one else got blessed in that conversation we had a year ago, I know I did, and I'm pretty sure the TM can say that he did too, but I'm sure others did as well.
And I think that's often what you can't always, when you talk about travel, show people that the potential of those relationships,
Yeah.
because it's hard to explain it until it happens, and until somebody travels in this way, the way you talked about. So I'm gonna go to Mississippi, I'm not just gonna go see the sights, and there are amazing things to see, but I'm gonna meet the people, and I'm gonna build friendships that are crossing boundaries, that are bridging divides, and that these are relationships that can stay for a lifetime, like the drivers that you mentioned, the people who your children got to see growing up. That's, to me, what really makes travel. And I think probably it's the same for you, Kim. Your kid is growing so different than any kid I know in Tel Aviv. He
Yeah.
he knows more Palestinians than I think anyone else in the city, and
I was
already.
going to say he's only 2, and one of his most favorite people is Aziz, mainly through Zoom. But then when he sees you in real life, he's like, oh,
Yeah,
we're
it's an
buddies.
easy name too. So it's like, yeah, Aziz is an easy name. I'll take it. But those are things that have such an impact that we don't really realize until we in it. And so we keep hoping that we can show it to more and more people, and that how it transforms us in a positive way, in a way that we will enjoy. Actually, these relationships, it comes with a pool sometimes, it comes with barbecue sometimes.
Well, again, just being in proximity to one another. I mean, I've got colleagues here at work, and we're a small university, but they don't know one another. They see each other from a distance. But when you get on a bus together for 7, 8, 9 days, you're having meals together. You get to know one another, and you see new friendships
Yeah.
being formed, and a different kind of working relationship being formed as a result of that. So.
Right. And you do get to know the person real. There's an old story, an old Islamic story about the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, and two people have a fight and they come before him. And he asks if there's somebody who can come and speak to their characters each. And one of them brings this guy, and he's like, he's the most amazing guy. He's my friend for 20 years. I know him so well. And the Caliph says, have you ever traveled with him? And he goes, no. And he's like, then you don't really know him. And in some ways, that's true. You
Yeah,
you see the frustration. You see
yeah,
what really
yeah,
ticks for them,
yeah,
what makes them
yeah,
upset, what makes them
yeah,
happy. You learn so much more
yeah,
about the 3-4 days travel with
yeah,
someone than you do through like getting a lunch once a month for 20 years, because it's not this specific time. You see them at their best and at their
yeah.
worst, which is what real relationships are about.
That's usually why I tell people when they're trying to figure out their rooming assignment, and people like to go for that double occupancy because it saves them a little bit of money. And I say, "Have you ever roomed with this person before?" They said, "Well, we've traveled together." No, but did you room with them? They're like, "Well, no." I said, "Well, I don't think now is where you want to start." And sure enough, it does. It's like they start rooming together, and that's why I always keep an extra room or two, because they'll come up that second day after that first night, and they're like, they snore. They stay up too late. They don't stay up late enough. They're sloppy or whatever. I'm like, I told you not to room with them. So
I've had that in one of the first tours I've done, and I learned it. Two people who were friends for 30 years
yeah,
roomed together,
yeah,
and halfway the trip, they were ready to murder each
yeah,
other.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And our conflict resolution turned from, here's what Israelis and Palestinians need to do, to like, all right, let's sit down and talk about this rooming arrangement. Two of you needs another room. But that's good, because we get to
Yeah,
know each other. Even
yes,
those difficult times are, I think, are important.
yes,
That's, like we say, that's real relationships.
yeah,
And
Oh,
Todd, you were talking earlier about your son and having guests come to dinner, and it's the same as we said for my son. And I think that the experiences that they're going to have at a young age, and the dilemmas that they're going to have at a very young age, I mean, what, with a 30-year difference between me and my son. I just wonder how that will affect the future of our communities. They're from a younger age having these meetings, having these thoughts. I'm just hopeful about the change that it will bring.
Well, Kim, I was impressed with your research skills there because there's a 30-year difference between my son and I, as well. Literally 30 years. I was like, wow, how did she know that? But yeah, no, you're right. That what they're being exposed to, and the skills that they're being equipped with to navigate, this ever-changing world that we're in. They're so much further ahead than you and
Yeah,
I are, and I'm just blessed, and I'm sure you'd say the same thing, to be able to provide them those opportunities. And then, but it also raises the expectation on you, because then now he will be expecting to see mom model
yeah,
what I've been learning on all these travels that I've been taking, right?
100%. And
True.
I think
Yeah.
that it will also put him in some conflict sometimes,
Oh yes.
in Israel and Palestine. But I think those conflicts are important,
Yes.
um, age appropriate, like you said earlier.
Hmm.
um, okay, I see we didn't have any questions come in, but I wanted to see if you had anything else you wanted to add or something you wanted to sum up with before we finish. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the tours that we have set up for our audience and community.
Sure. I would just say this about traveling on any of these experiences, but these civil rights tours in particular. I know some people, again, might be a little bit cautious because they think they can't handle the emotion that will be involved, or they may say that I'll do that one day, but not today. None of us knows. Again, this past year has taught us plainly. None of us knows what tomorrow holds, right? But I do know that we're all getting older, and I do know that a lot of the veterans that we meet with are getting older, and that along the 20-year journey we've been on, we've lost a lot of people, a lot have gone on. So these voices, these authentic voices of the movement, are not going to always be with us. And so I would just strongly encourage anyone who's on the fence and thinking about, do I want to go, and do I want to go this year? Make now the time that you go, so that you can encounter these people. And it's not for my benefit, or you, Kim, or you, Aziz. It's not for your benefit that you go. It's for your own benefit. And I promise you that you will not be disappointed in the experience that you had. In fact, you are going to be running out and telling everybody, why didn't I do this sooner? Why didn't I know this stuff? And when can we go again? Right? I promise you, that's a promise.
Amen. Yeah, and as you know, what's interesting, as we started making these trips together and working on it, my mind started being more focused on these things. And I started making friends from these areas that I would not, I think, have thought of making those friends. And I told you in the beginning, I was in a film festival just recently, and I want to recommend it to everyone. I don't know if it's still available to watch, but it was a film in a film festival about Black rock climbers. It is one of the most moving, definitely the best climbing film of the year. But it's funny. It's in the same time very moving. It's these young guys who are just doing amazing stuff in Memphis. And
Mhm.
as I saw the film, I walked to the guys in it, and I said, "Hey, I would like to meet you." And the next day we went to lunch together and had an amazing time actually comparing how does it like growing in Palestine versus Memphis, and making tons of jokes and just enjoying each other company. And then I said, "I'm coming to Memphis in October," something like that. They're like, "You have to come to our home. We're gonna bake a barbecue, and we're gonna you." I was asking them, "What's the best restaurant in Memphis?" They're like, "Our home." I'm like, all right, fair. We'll come to your house. So the film name is Black Ice. 2020. Look at the 2020 because our other film's called Black Ice, and it's just a fantastic film. And I'm looking forward to introducing you, just like TM last time, to these guys. I think you love them as well.
That's awesome.
So a word about our domestic U.S. Travel. The pandemic has got us thinking about how we can give our community a little more. And for those that don't want to go too far, then there are a lot of opportunities now on the Mejdi website. Some even are just weekends, some are a bit longer. And we look forward to seeing you there. We can do private tours. We have scheduled departures, and what we can guarantee is these kind of conversations like we had today, and just getting to know people that are a little more interesting than watching another movie, or sitting on your couch and watching TV, which I I do every day. but but I think that once you leave the house and you take that step, like Todd said, you learn so much more. And that's why Aziz always says it's
It's
not.
not where to travel, but it's how.
Yeah, and we truly believe in this. So thank you, Todd, for joining us again, and
Thank
our
you.
listeners as well. We hope to meet everyone in person. I haven't met Todd yet in person, so
Yes.
hoping that'll happen sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.